I woke up to the antiseptic burn of the hospital air and the slow mechanical beeping of the monitor above my head. But those weren't what made my heart lurch. It was the sight of my Aunt Lydia sitting in the chair by my bed, legs crossed neatly, a lawyer's leather briefcase perched at her side like a lurking animal. She smiled in a way that felt rehearsed, her lipstick too bright for a room like this. "You gave us quite a scare," she said, brushing invisible lint from her skirt. "But I've been taking care of everything." I was still groggy from the pain meds, my mind thick, but something about the way she said everything sliced through the fog. I glanced toward the small sofa under the window, where a man in a navy suit looked up from his phone, scanning me like I was one more item on his list. He wasn't family or a friend. "Who?" I rasped, my throat raw. "This is Mr. Donovan," Lydia answered smoothly. "We've been putting some paperwork together, just so Sophie is secure while you recover." Sophie, my 6-year-old daughter. My chest tightened hard enough to set off a louder beep on the monitor. Lydia's tone was syrupy, but I could see how comfortable she looked running the conversation, how the man's eyes avoided mine. "Paperwork for what?" I tried to push myself up, but a spike of pain pinned me back. "Guardianship. Only temporary, of course," Lydia said, as if the words were as harmless as offering tea. "You've been through quite an ordeal, and you need to rest without worrying about day-to-day." My hands were trembling, whether from the medication or from what I'd just heard. I couldn't tell. Why was my aunt even talking to a lawyer about my child without asking me? "I didn't agree to that," I croaked. Lydia's smile didn't falter, but I saw the faint tightening in her jaw. "Sweetheart, nobody's taking anything away from you. We're just making sure things don't fall apart in the meantime." But if that were true, why did her lawyer already have a manila folder open on his lap? Why did I feel like I'd woken up in someone else's plan for my life? If you think this was nothing more than harmless overprotectiveness, wait until you hear why she was really the one sitting in that chair instead of my best friend, who I had actually listed as Sophie's backup guardian. Shall I write the next chapter? When Lydia finally left the room, her perfume lingering like a film I couldn't wash off, I stared at the ceiling and tried to piece together the nightmare I'd just stepped into. The accident had happened so quickly. One moment I was driving home from work. The next, I woke up here with a spinal fracture and a mess of internal bruising. I'd been told I'd need weeks, maybe months, before I could move as freely as before. Before the accident, I had gone over every emergency contact form with care. My best friend Marissa was supposed to be the one to take Sophie if anything happened. She knew Sophie's allergies, her night terrors, the way she liked her waffle cut into 4 neat squares. Lydia's name had only been listed in one place, the notify in case of emergency slot at Sophie's school, because Marissa lived across town and Lydia was closer. It wasn't supposed to mean anything more. And yet, Lydia had been the one to swoop in. She hadn't even called Marissa, apparently, until Sophie was already staying in her house. Now she was talking about guardianship like it was a natural progression, like my accident had somehow rewritten the rules. But here's the thing about Lydia. She's always been hungry for control masked as generosity. When my mom died, she was the one who offered to help handle the estate, and somehow came out of that 4-month ordeal with Mom's jewelry collection in her possession. Every favor from her had strings you didn't see until you were tangled in them. I couldn't shake the image of Sophie in her frilly pajamas in Lydia's pristine guest room, the one Lydia never let anyone sit in without plastic covers. It wasn't Sophie's home. It wasn't safe the way home was safe. And if Lydia was already looping in lawyers, I had no doubt she'd push to make her arrangement permanent. I picked up my phone from the tray table and saw 6 missed calls from Marissa. I called her back immediately, my hands tightening on the rails of the hospital bed as she answered with, "Where the hell have you been? They wouldn't let me see Sophie at school yesterday. Her voice was shaking, equal parts anger and fear. She told me about the staff saying temporary custody directives had been given to them by family. The family being Lydia. I could feel it now. The first threads of something bigger than a misunderstanding winding around me. Lydia wasn't just helping, she was positioning herself. And I was about to realize the first subtle signs had started long before I even got into the accident. Shall I write the next chapter? The first sign had been small enough to ignore. And I did. Because who suspects family of plotting when you're barely holding your life together? A month before the accident, Sophie had come home from a weekend sleepover at Lydia's with a story that made me laugh at first. She was brushing her teeth when she said, "Aunt Lydia says I might live with her forever if you ever get too tired." I'd playfully asked, "Too tired for what?" Sophie shrugged like it was nothing and spit pink foam into the sink. I chalked it up to Lydia's dramatic way of speaking to children. The same way she'd tell Sophie she'd keep her forever when giving her ice cream past bedtime. But now, replaying that moment in the quiet of the hospital room, it didn't sound so innocent. There were other things too, subtle as shadows against the wall. Lydia had started telling Sophie how lucky she'd be to have a bigger bedroom at her house, mentioning the school near her was better ranked, slipping in how grown-up her neighborhood felt compared to ours. I thought it was garden-variety one-upmanship. Lydia had always been proud of her good taste and better standards. But Marissa's call gnawed at me. Sophie hadn't been picked up by her from school not just once, but 3 times in the last 2 weeks before the accident. Each time, Lydia had found a reason. Traffic, a forgotten permission slip, and each excuse now seemed suspiciously orchestrated. It made me feel sick, because once you start to suspect, you start to remember everything differently. The way Lydia had insisted on taking Sophie to the pediatrician just to help when I had a late meeting. The abrupt withdrawal of Lydia's warmth toward me whenever Sophie and I were especially close at family gatherings. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lydia had been planting seeds for months, building a version of reality where Sophie fit into her world instead of mine. And I had let it happen right under my nose, because I was too busy scraping rent together and surviving the grind. I lay there, pulse thumping in my ears, thinking maybe it was time to confront her before this twisted help of hers grew into something legal and irreversible. But Lydia was already preparing to make her next move, and she was about to do it in a room full of people who would believe every perfect, poisoned word she said. Shall I write the next chapter? 2 days later, Lydia appeared in my hospital room again, this time without the lawyer. But she didn't need him. She came armed with something much more dangerous, a calculated performance. She fussed with my blanket, adjusted the blinds so sunlight hit just right, and spoke loudly enough for the nurse making notes on her clipboard to hear. "We've all been so worried. Poor Sophie has been asking why you're too weak to see her. She'll be better when she's in a stable routine." It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. As if she were explaining a messy situation to a judge, each word dripping with care and quiet judgment all at once. "I can see her," I said sharply. "I want her to come today." The nurse glanced between us, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. Lydia smiled sadly, like I'd just spouted something delusional. "Of course you want that," she said softly, squeezing my hand. "But children can get so unsettled seeing their parent hooked up to machines. It's better I keep her calm for now." Better. I keep her calm. The phrasing felt deliberate, like she was inserting herself as the default. I saw the way the nurse's pen paused over the chart, and suddenly it clicked. Lydia wasn't just intercepting Sophie. She was curating a narrative, dropping hints to medical staff that I wasn't completely capable of making parental decisions right now. By the time the nurse left, I was boiling under my skin. "Stop insinuating I can't take care of my own daughter," I hissed. Her expression cooled in an instant, steel replacing sweetness. "I'm doing what's best for her, not what makes you feel better. Try to remember that, especially when the social worker visits." Social worker? My lips parted, but she was already bending to give me a perfunctory kiss on the temple before gliding out the doorway. That night, I barely slept. My phone buzzed with a text from Marissa. "Did you know Lydia told Sophie's teacher you might be out for a very long time, and she should expect Sophie to transfer schools?" I felt like my life was slowly being rewritten without my permission, and the next place Lydia would slip her influence would be somewhere even harder to undo. My daughter's school. Shall I write the next chapter? The call from Sophie's teacher came the very next morning. I was still lying stiff in the hospital bed, staring at the faded water stain on the ceiling, when my phone vibrated. "Hi, Mrs. Ellison," she began, her voice cautious. "I just wanted to double-check something. We've had some changes in pickup arrangements for Sophie, and I wanted to confirm that you approved them." The back of my neck prickled. "What changes?" She explained that for the last week, Lydia had been dropping Sophie off and picking her up, which I already knew. But yesterday, a new instruction had come through. If Lydia wasn't available, the school was to release Sophie only to Lydia's husband, Mark, not Marissa, not me. I gripped the phone so tight my stitches twinged. "I never approved that." The teacher hesitated. "It came in as a signed fax. Looked pretty official. It also mentioned something about a potential enrollment transfer if..." She cut herself off. "Wait, you really didn't sign this?" "No," I said flatly. "Please don't honor anything like that unless you hear it directly from me. Only me." By the time I hung up, my heart was slamming in my ears. I called Marissa immediately, and she confirmed what the teacher had said, except she added one more infuriating detail. The day before, when Marissa went to pick up Sophie, the secretary told her they couldn't release Sophie because they'd been told, "Mom can't make decisions right now." That phrasing was pure Lydia. Carefully vague, impossible to directly contradict without sounding defensive. I tried to picture Sophie's face as she stood in the hallway, watching Marissa argue with the school staff, wondering why she couldn't just go with her. How many of these moments had there been that I didn't even know about yet? I was starting to understand that this wasn't about Lydia stepping in for a crisis. This was about her methodically removing me from every loop that connected me to my own child, and replacing me with herself in each one. I decided it was time to counter her moves with something official, something that couldn't be twisted into concern. But Lydia wasn't in the mood for compromise, and rejecting my plan would reveal just how far into the future she'd already been planning behind my back. Shall I write the next chapter? I called my lawyer that afternoon from the hospital bed, my voice still shaky but firm. I laid everything out. Lydia's sudden guardianship talk, the school pickup interference, the whispers to medical staff. He didn't need me to spell out the danger. By the end of the call, he drafted a temporary custody statement that made it crystal clear. While I was recovering, Marissa was my chosen backup caregiver. It wasn't just verbal. It was signed, notarized, stamped. 2 days later, Lydia walked into my room, the document waiting in a neat manila envelope on my tray table. I handed it to her without a word. She skimmed it, and her smile froze somewhere between annoyance and disbelief. "This puts Marissa in charge?" she said, as if the concept was in a foreign language. "It's temporary," I said evenly. "Like you've been saying this whole time. This just takes the pressure off everyone." Her eyes flicked up to mine, cool and calculating. "Why would you make this bureaucratic mess when Sophie is already settled? She's comfortable with me." "This isn't about your comfort, Lydia." She set the paper down with exaggerated care, as if it were fragile crystal. "You think you're protecting her, but you're making it harder. Social services will see you're scattering her stability. Do you want them to think you're unfit? The word landed like a dart. I stared at her, realizing she'd said it without hesitation. Unfit. That's what she'd been building toward. Every little comment, every intercepted pickup, every insinuation wasn't for me. It was for an invisible audience she'd been playing to all along. I won't sign this, she added, straightening. And I won't honor it. Sophie's with me. That's that. I felt my pulse rip through me. She thought she could simply refuse, like this was a polite disagreement instead of my legal right. I wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled in a way I knew would make her slightly uneasy. You've already put things in writing before, Lydia. I've seen your signature, and I'm going to see where else it's shown up. Because what I found next wouldn't just be hints or suspicions. It would be proof. Cold, dated, and impossible to spin. Shall I write the next chapter? The proof came to me by accident. Though in hindsight, it was probably Lydia's arrogance that made her slip. It was a Thursday afternoon, the ward quieter than usual, when Lydia stopped by with a tote bag full of things from home for me. She set it down on the chair, chatting idly while she fussed with Sophie's new routine at her place. I was half listening, half focusing on the mild throbbing in my back, when she stepped into the hallway to take a phone call. Bored, I reached into the tote looking for my phone charger. Instead, my hand brushed against the smooth edge of a thick envelope. Curiosity pricked at me. When I slid it out, the words stamped on the corner made my skin go cold. Superior Court of County. Petition for guardianship of a minor. The handwriting on the post-it attached to it was Lydia's. Neat, looping letters I'd recognize anywhere. File before Friday. Include teacher's letter and medical notes. My mouth went dry. The documents inside weren't half-finished drafts. They were complete. Filed. Dated nearly 3 weeks ago. Before my accident. In other words, before there was any recovery period excuse to even pretend this was temporary. She'd been planning to take Sophie for good long before she had any reason to help. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page of distortions. Mother currently unable to provide stable housing. Ongoing health concerns limit her parenting capacity. Child has established significant emotional bonds in petitioner's household. My stomach lurched. These were lies, crafted like truths. And then I saw it. A medical note on her behalf from Sophie's pediatrician, claiming I'd missed multiple follow-ups. I'd never missed one. Someone had fed him misinformation, and I could guess exactly who. Outside the door, I heard her heels clicking closer. I shoved the file back into her tote and pulled the blanket over my chest, heart racing. My face must have betrayed me when she walked in, because her eyes narrowed for just a split second before the sugary smile returned. "You look pale," she said softly, setting the tote back down as if she didn't know I'd touched it. My pulse was pounding so loud I could barely hear my own voice when I said, "I think I'm ready to go home." If Lydia was going to make her move within days, I had to be there before she tried to walk into a courtroom without me even knowing the hearing was happening. But leaving the hospital early would mean more than just physical pain. It would mean walking straight into whatever trap she'd set up in my own house. Shall I write the next chapter? I signed the discharge papers against medical advice. The doctor's brows knitted as he warned me I was risking tearing stitches, worsening the fracture in my back. But the thought of Lydia walking into court, file in hand, while I lay here hooked up to IVs, was worse than any pain I could imagine. Marissa picked me up that night. She didn't ask many questions, just helped me into the passenger seat, and handed me a travel pillow so the seatbelt wouldn't dig into my ribs. The drive to my house felt longer than the car ride after the accident. My pulse was high, my hands damp on my lap. When we pulled into my driveway, The first detail I noticed was the porch light. It was on. I never left it on during the day, and Marissa swore it hadn't been her. Inside, little changes screamed at me. Sophie's shoes missing from the rack, the framed photo of the three of us replaced by a stiff studio portrait of her and Lydia. There was that same antiseptic clean smell Lydia's house had, faint but here, as if someone had been making improvements in my absence. Marissa carried my bag inside, but my focus was on the kitchen counter, where a small pile of unopened mail sat, except for one envelope that had been slit open and roughly resealed. My name was typed in block letters, the return address belonging to the county family court. I peeled it open with shaking hands. Inside was a notice. Hearing. Emergency petition for guardianship. Date. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. My blood went ice cold. She'd timed it perfectly, counting on me still being in bed at the hospital, unable to respond. If I hadn't found that file in her tote. I couldn't even finish the thought. "We need to be there," Marissa said, her voice hard. "With everything you've got." Everything I had was in my head, my phone, and now the knowledge that she'd lied on official documents. But I realized something chilling. While I had small truths, she had built a polished narrative backed by people who thought they were doing the right thing. The difference in preparation terrified me. This wasn't just fighting my aunt. This was walking into battle with someone who had an entire false story in her arsenal. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say, what I would bring, how I would strip her story apart piece by piece. Tomorrow wouldn't be court yet. Tomorrow would be the beginning. Because before we could face a judge, there was one scene that had to happen first. I was going to confront Lydia, in my own kitchen, with Sophie there to hear the truth. Shall I write the next chapter? Lydia was already in my kitchen when I came down the next morning, wearing her favorite cream cardigan like it was a badge of moral superiority. She was making pancakes, Sophie's favorite, but not my recipe, and humming as if she'd lived here all her life. Sophie sat at the table in her pajamas, looking smaller than I remembered, her hair neatly braided the way Lydia liked. When she saw me, she froze mid-bite, glancing quickly between us. "You're home early," Lydia said, sliding another pancake onto Sophie's plate, as though I weren't standing there trembling. "You should be resting." I ignored her. "Sophie, sweetheart, can you go upstairs for a few minutes? I need to talk to Aunt Lydia alone." Lydia's hand landed lightly on Sophie's shoulder, possessively. "She can stay. We have no secrets, right, honey?" The implication was a punch to my gut. Sophie's eyes darted again, confused. I took a deep breath, the file from her tote bag clutched in my hands. "Actually, she should hear this." My voice was sharper now. "Because she should know I found these." I dropped the manila folder onto the table. Pages fanned out. The petition for guardianship, the fabricated notes, the teacher's letter twisted into a weapon. Lydia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't touch them. "You've been planning this," I said. "Before my accident, before you had any reason to think she needed a new home. You lied in writing about me. You forged my signature with the school. You even roped in her doctor with misinformation." "Sweetheart," Lydia began, all silky control. "You're recovering from trauma. These are just—" "Don't," I snapped. "I'm not confused. And tomorrow, we'll both be in court. I'll have these and the truth, and witnesses who know exactly what you've been doing." There was a long silence. Then she stood, slow and deliberate, the cardigan shifting around her like armor. "You think a judge is going to believe a woman fresh out of the hospital over a stable married couple with a pristine home and a clear head? You're not seeing the bigger picture." "Maybe not," I said, my voice low but steady. "But Sophie's seeing it, right now." Because Sophie hadn't gone upstairs. She was standing right behind me, not making a sound, taking it all in. every sickening word. And the look on her face told me that even if Lydia thought she owned the narrative, something in Sophie had just changed. Tomorrow in court, that change might be the one thing Lydia didn't plan for. Shall I write the next chapter? The courthouse smelled faintly of floor polish and air that had been trapped in the building for decades. I sat beside Marissa at the petitioner's desk, the manila folder wedged under my arm like a lifeline. Across the aisle, Lydia looked immaculate in a navy dress and pearls, her hands folded primly in front of her. Her lawyer, the same man who had been in my hospital room that first morning, leafed through a stack of documents, occasionally leaning in to murmur something that made her smile faintly. The judge was middle-aged, with deep creases in his face and a gaze that didn't seem to miss much. He called the case, and just like that, Lydia's lawyer launched into a carefully polished speech about stability, continuity of care, and my prolonged absence due to recovery. I waited. I let him paint me small. When it was my turn, my hands didn't shake as much as I had feared. "Your Honor," I began, "this petition was filed before my accident, weeks before. It's not about temporary care. This is about my aunt trying to remove me from my daughter's life permanently." I slid the file across. Inside were copies of the petition's date, the false statements, and, my trump card, printed text messages from Lydia to a mutual friend. They weren't subtle. "Once she's declared unfit, Sophie can start school here immediately. Trying to get custody before she finds out." The judge's eyebrows rose. "These are your messages, Miss Caro?" Lydia's voice caught for the first time. Taken completely out of context, I didn't let her finish. Ask her why she told Sophie's school to release my daughter only to her or her husband, or why she had her lawyer meet me in the hospital before I'd even been allowed to see my child. Marissa spoke up next, verifying the school incident, her voice sharp with anger. I saw the judge glance from me to Lydia, the weight in the room shifting. When Sophie's teacher took the stand, yes, she'd come, shaking but firm, and confirmed there had been a signed directive that excluded me, I knew the tide had officially turned. Lydia's attorney stiffened, whispering furiously to her, but it was too late. The judge called a recess for deliberation, but his expression already told me which way the decision was leaning. When he came back, the words were simple, final. "Petition for guardianship is denied." The gavel hit the block, and my knees nearly gave out with relief. But this wasn't the end, because the fallout from this, in our family and beyond it, was about to break hard and fast. Shall I write the next chapter? The decision had barely left the judge's mouth before Lydia was on her feet, gathering her papers with the same crisp efficiency she'd probably imagined using to collect her court victory. Her face was a mask. Not outrage, not sorrow, just a controlled, cold void. That was how I knew she was furious. Marissa squeezed my hand as we walked out into the corridor, but I could feel the vibration of Lydia's heels behind us, the measured pace of someone determined not to be seen running away. She passed me without a word, but the faintest hiss reached my ear. "You'll regret humiliating me." Outside, word was already traveling. My cousin Jenna, Lydia's own daughter, texted me a single line. "Is this true?" When I replied, "Yes," she didn't answer. Within an hour, half the extended family group chat had gone strangely silent. By evening, the silence was broken by a barrage of calls from relatives. Some were supportive. Others accused me of tearing the family apart or shaming Lydia publicly instead of handling it privately. But there was no private anymore. Lydia had made it public the second she involved schools, social workers, and a court of law. The more I spoke to people that night, the more I realized how deep her preparation had gone. She had already been telling certain family members I was struggling financially, whispering that I was slipping emotionally. For them, Today's hearing had been a shock, not because she had tried to take Sophie, but because her plan had failed. Even the fallout had two faces. In one half of the family, I was a mother who fought for her child and won. In the other, I was an ungrateful niece who stabbed her aunt in the back after she stepped up in a crisis. The strangest call came from my uncle, Lydia's estranged brother, who told me quietly, "You got lucky. She tried something like this years ago with Jenna's kids. Only difference was, no one stopped her then." That sentence kept echoing in my head long after Sophie was asleep upstairs that night. Because if Lydia had done this before, then letting her back into Sophie's life, even a little, was a risk I couldn't afford. And that was where the final choice loomed: family ties, or the boundary I knew I needed to erect forever. Shall I write the final chapter?